Good evening, and thank you to the USF Lecture Series at ACPL. Tonight, we are welcoming Dr. Gaetano LaRoche, who is an assistant professor of art education at the University of St. Francis. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm going to show you images of my work, and you'll notice that the work ranges from images of nature to more abstract work. And that's the underlying theme, which is I'm always looking at the world and I'm studying the world, but in a more abstract way. And then it comes out in my drawings and paintings in terms of the light and the form and how things come together, how I perceive the world. I'm just going to go backwards here to the beginning. So I titled the presentation Work Over Time because I'm starting with work that, welcome, that's okay. Started with work that I did when I was in college and when I was 18 years old. Not this one. This one's actually just a couple of years ago. But these are some figure paintings from my first year painting class. So we had a model and different poses. I can't remember how long the poses were, but my interest was in capturing the planes of the body and using different colors. And I looked at the work of the Fauves, which were a French group of artists. And then there were some portraits I did during that time, also the same kind of sense of color and movement and light on the figure as with the nudes. So there's a reclining nude and a standing nude. During the same time, I was working drawing horses outdoors in Rhode Island, which is where I grew up. And there's a farm there. It's called Cogshell Farm, and it's a great place. It's kept like an historic farm, and so I would go there and study and draw the horses. So again, they have the form of the horses, but there's an abstraction to them. And these also were when I was probably 20. I had the pleasure to work at the Vermont Studio Center, which is an artist residency up in northern Vermont, in Johnston, Vermont. And this is something that I began there, which were some tiger lilies that were growing outside. And then when I took it back, at the time I was living in New York, and I took it back to New York and worked in my studio. And so it went from this first iteration to this piece here, which I eventually call Flowers Blowing in the Wind, because there's a sense of movement flowing and as if the wind was blowing the flowers. Okay, I do like to work with the white of the canvas. I feel that it adds a different depth to the canvas, a different depth to the image, and I also find it to be quite beautiful. So often I leave areas white for that reason. So again, following the theme of working from nature, this is a river scene. I was out camping for a while and studying the same rocks and trees and river. And so that's a small drawing done with ink on site. And the next couple will be more drawings done with ink. So from a river scene to a stovetop espresso scene. So things that are just, I find in the kitchen with the light hitting them. Just pots on top of each other. And then plants. I'm always drawing plants. And things, as you can see, in the house. And I consider this part as much a part of my practice as an artist as the paintings that then come from them. Sometimes the drawings I'll work on with gouache, which is a kind of watercolor paint. And so we'll have things that will begin in this manner, but then will eventually have color and take on a whole new life. There was a time, I'd say, about the early 2000s, maybe 2003 to 2005. I worked on images of saints. So here are two images of St. Francis, which I thought was great because now I work at the University of St. Francis. So the one on the left was more of the first working out of the idea of St. Francis speaking to a bird with a blue sky up above. And then the one on the right is a more finished version. It's actually 4 feet by 6 feet, so it's quite large. And I based these in part on the paintings of Giotto in Italy, who did a series on St. Francis. But he also did the series on the life of Christ in the Arena Chapel in Italy, which I studied quite a bit. And this one, the next one is Jesus and Judas, which comes from a sketch that I did from, I believe it's called the Scrovini Chapel in Padua, Italy. And so I went to the chapel, and this was 1998, and did drawings while I was there. And then some years later, I took some of those drawings and made them into paintings. And this also is 4 by 6 feet, so quite large. Combined with my interest in nature is an interest in landscapes, and this one I call Vermont Pastoral because I did this at a second time that I was up at the Vermont Studio Center, and I had a large studio and great views, and I would spend part of the morning out drawing from nature, drawing with ink, and then I would in the afternoons work on paintings. And here's one of the paintings. I believe it shows some references to the artist Osho Gorky, who I'm a great admirer of, and his sense of color and his sense of forms. The next slide just gives you an idea of the size of the piece. So this was from a show at the Lafayette Center for the Arts in Lafayette, Louisiana. And you can see some of the size of the piece. That's Stephanie Patton, who's an artist in Louisiana. And so there's the landscape Vermont Pastoral and another piece behind it. Is another abstract landscape, which I call New Land, because for me, there were new ways of working in this. I worked with charcoal as well as with oils and paint. And this was actually in that previous show in Louisiana. And I remember at the opening, there was a young woman and her father there, and she went to him. She said, "Dad, that looks like the bridge by such and such a place." So that was really nice. It wasn't that bridge because I had never seen that one, but it was nice that people could come along and then see things in the work. And here's a later abstract landscape, and it's a photo taken outside on the side of a building, just so again you can have a sense of the scale of it. So about 4 feet by 10 feet. And there's a sense of movement to it that is part of what I see in nature. So in landscapes, I always feel that they're not static, they're not just there, but they're always moving and flowing. Okay, this particular piece combines painting with oils and oil sticks. So on the The parts that are more linear, more like lines, were done with the oil stick. So the oil stick just allowed me to bring in an element of line to the work. And I also love the vibrancy of the oil stick and the ability to create marks that are different than painted marks. So in effect, it's combining drawing and painting. And the title for this is Triumph and Defeat, because I feel like so much of living is either a triumph or a defeat, or it feels like either a triumph or a defeat. And this, again, shows my interest in movement and motion in the paint, and is a piece from 2015 in abstraction. This particular piece I call Funny Face, because on the left you can see there's kind of a face, kind of a character with a flower at the very bottom. And it was painted upon an older painting. So on the right you can see more of what the older painting looked like. And on the left, this character emerged, this funny face character. And this is another work from 2015. I tried to, in the last 5 or 6 years, to lighten up my palette and have my work be more open. And here's an example of a piece. So I'm working on trying to keep the sense of openness, but at the same time trying to keep the color intensities going. In addition to drawing and painting, I work in printmaking. I primarily work with lithography, which is drawing with a greasy medium. In this case, it's a greasy medium on stone, which then gets processed. So this is a print, so it's on top of paper, but the original drawing was on stone, and it was inspired by tulips that I saw coming out of the ground. And then when I was in the print shop working on the lithographic stone, I worked with the crayon. It's called lithographic crayon, and the wash, touche washes. So this was done in 2010. But then I dropped the same image upon a previous print. So that is the color underneath. And then 4 years later, I worked with the same image and added characters. So they're kind of dinosaur characters in this one. So it combined study of plants, tulip plants, and then it combined imaginary figures and imaginary characters. And here is a different color version, which I call Under the Sea, because it has the colors of the sea. The blues, the light blues, the green blues coming together. So I'll just go backwards so you can see how they came together. So that being the first one, which was inspired by tulip plants.
Can you give us the years again?
Sure, this one,
More or less.
yeah, this one was 2010, this initial.
Okay.
And this was also 2010, but I dropped it on an older print. This was 4 years later, so 2014. And these were 2014.
I'm just waiting for COVID to hit. I'm just curious.
This goes backwards. This is 2010. It's also the lithograph. That's why it's there. And I call it a bird by any other name because there are different types of bird. There's the big bird, and then there are the little characters, or kind of bird-like characters. And a friend of mine once said that it looks like the bird and the posers posing as birds. So that's what he saw. I received a Pollock-Krasner grant, which was for my drawings and paintings, and this is just an image from their Instagram page. Well, actually, it's just an image from their website. So these are 4 of my images, which I will come back to later. Later I'll show some work that is on the internet, and this will come back to that. This was around COVID time, so right at 2019, a few months before the pandemic hit. And it's a combination of looking at flowers and working with abstraction together. So again, my dual interest in abstraction and nature. And still white, yeah. And this one actually, the white is applied instead of just being left behind. And so it's a thicker paint. And the flowers were based on flowers I had in the house. And again, here again is the abstraction and nature, so a plant. Here's another version. This one was 2021. So that one was just during the pandemic. Both of these were 2021. This one I call Rustling Leaves because it has the feeling of movement, and I think the sounds that you could hear if you were stepping on leaves or working outside and you feel the leaves underneath your feet. And this is one of the recent ones that I did in Indiana. And since it was one of the first paintings I did, I called it Indiana. And I've just been here since August. And there's a certain light here which is different than I was in Wyoming the previous year and spent a lot of time in New York. So it's a different light here, which is very beautiful. And this also is one of the most recent pieces, which I call The Sun in the Sea. Because up above the orange, reddish yellow figures the sun, and then the sea colors below. And again, I'm working with the white and the sea colors and sense of movement. This image was then used for this card. And this card is for a show that is actually still up at the University of St. Francis at the Lipke Gallery. And you can go there if you want to see more of the works in person, if you want to see the work in person. Monday to Friday, business hours, 9 to 5. It's on Spring Street. And then I'm just going to show some, this is the Pollock Krasner website. And these are the works. Okay, this is another large piece which I called My Abstraction from 2008. And I think I'll go back because these are 2 pieces that first I submitted to the Pollock Krasner Foundation. This one I call The King and the God. There are all kinds, again, my interest in thick black lines and movement, and a king character, and the hand of God character, and a kind of wheel here. And this one I call On the Mountain because there's a little figure here on top of a hill-like shape. So the first 2 were from the late 1990s, 98 or so. And this one here is from 2010. And so you can see how, while I still have a strong interest in abstraction, my colors are changing and the use of the white as part of the image has changed from that, where the paint was thicker and more opaque. and I'm not saying that one is better, but that's just a change that has happened over time. I became more interested in creating space with the white of the surface and what that implies in a landscape. Okay. Another thing I've been doing for about 10 years is I have a blog, which just I called the drawing blog. And you can see from here, so this says 2023, but it goes all the way back to 2010. And initially, for the first year, I posted one drawing every day. And then I just posted a couple each month, and now I just post a couple each month. And it's always fun to look at and see that people have been looking at it, and the analytics will show the works that they looked at, so it'll go all the way back. And it's curious for me, it's interesting to me to see what appeals to people, what interests them. But, so if you wanted to see more work, there's the one we showed earlier. Sometimes I included quotes from whatever I'd been reading, but you can go to the actual works and look at them more thoroughly.
We'll leave that question.
I'm just going to repeat the question for the viewing audience. The question was, how has COVID affected my work or my working? The pandemic. How the shutdown and the pandemic affected my work. I would say overall I spent, like most everyone, more time indoors and less time in social gatherings. So I think that affected my work, and that I was kind of quieter. My life was quieter. I think my work became maybe quieter. It became smaller in scale. So there was a smaller scale to it. I think it actually became more important to me. So it became more something that I related to in a different way. And the other thing is that for part of the pandemic, I was in Wyoming, which was not strictly following very many guidelines. Big sky land, and so was not like being in a city where things were really shut down. So there was an effect, but it was not as dramatic as if I had perhaps lived in a city. Yes?
When did you say you started teaching at University?
I just started teaching there in the fall.
Oh, last fall?
Last fall.
Okay.
So the question was, when had I started teaching at University of St. Francis? And I just began teaching there in the fall of 2022. The question was, what is my pace as a painter? And she has ascertained that it is a fast pace. I spend a lot of time thinking and looking, but then I do seem to work more quickly than some people. And that also part of that, I like to see the movement of the paint. So there's a quickness to it. I'm trying to capture, in this case, the tiger lilies. And so I'm also interested in how they're moving. So I think that the quick pace relates to how they're moving, how things are moving in the wind or not moving. Were you a student at St. Francis? Okay.
Are you working on a theme right now? You had mentioned about painting saints, and
Right.
plants are in your house, so you can always revert to them. But
Yep.
what's your theme 2020?
I would say what I'm working on now is smaller landscapes, so and smaller abstractions that are dealing more with brighter colors. and a sense of the outdoors in a smaller sense. So again, here's the house plant that you mentioned. And this one, the paint is really very thick. I think you can see that, the thickness on the top. And that's probably 2020. I worked on that painting, 2019. Okay, so the question was, where is my studio and how much time do I get to spend in it outside of my teaching responsibilities? Right now I have a room in my house, which is my studio, so it's a studio room. And I usually work there a couple of days a week for a couple of hours. And the drawings are almost every day, so for maybe half an hour or so. So I'm trying to draw every day, and then I'm working on paintings a couple of days a week. I had in the past had an outside studio, and that is when I was in New York, and I was also working on larger works. And so part of the size of the work does have to do with the workspace that I'm in. And so now I'm working smaller, I'm in a smaller space, but it also feels right, feels like something that's going together. No. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for your wonderful presentation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This is our last lecture for the spring and the summer. We will return in the fall with a new batch of lectures, so keep an eye out for those. And then just a reminder that our summer reading program kicks off June 1st. So please participate. Thank
Great.
you.
And I want to thank the library for giving me this opportunity to present my work and talk to you. Thank you very much.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Explore tab at acpl.info.
The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.